Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 24th audio chat now on the Q News Patriot Rumble channel series. I'm the Q News Patriot, coming to you with a fantastic group of individuals that are spearheading very, very important work in the world at this time. This is SG Anon. My guests today comprise the speaking podium, if you will, for a group called the Former Feds. As is my understanding, and we're going to go into much more detail in a moment, the Former Feds is currently spearheading the movement around the world to draw attention to the organized medical criminality, the mafioso-style concentration camp mindsets that were prevailing during the pandemic of 2020 and 21, which resulted, of course, in conjunction with a death protocol and a very large number of unnecessary and needless deaths here in the United States and around the world. This, of course, by traditional definition, amounts to large-scale organized medical malpractice resulting in murder. This implies culpability in these crimes, and the Former Feds are one of the groups that are going around and assigning real work and homework to community individuals and people that have experienced this criminality and building an army to take back that space. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guests. We have Mr. Brad Geyer here, who is one of the founders of the Former Feds group, a very distinguished career and a very educated individual. We have Ms. Gail Seiler, a personal experience individual, witness, if you will, a whistleblower as to the criminality that occurred within the hospital system as a hospital attempted to medically murder her but was unsuccessful. And then, of course, we have Ms. Carolyn Blakeman speaking on behalf of Halting Hospital Homicide. So thank you very much, each of you, for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start out, actually, if we could, with Ms. Seiler and a brief, Reader's Digest of the events that occurred, which brought you to this movement, because I think that your personal story adds very, very important context and understanding for the audience out there as we get into the work that Mr. Geyer and Ms. Blakeman are actually pursuing. So, Ms. Gail, could you or would you be willing to give us a little bit of how that occurred and went down in 2020 and 2021 and what you've experienced since then?
Yeah, so I had always been aware and in the medical freedom space, but what brought me together with Former Feds group is I ended up in the hospital with COVID pneumonia, and I chose a hospital that had previously given a pretty well-known politician, Colonel Allen West, the frontline doctor protocol. It's right near our house. But, my husband had to take me there because my oxygen was low. And I'm going to give you the short version because my story can be found on chbmp.org for more information. But ultimately, what happened was when the doctor in charge found out that I was not vaccinated, that I didn't take the shot, he patted me on the hand and said, Mrs. Seiler, he said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Seiler, but you're going to die." And he had made up his mind at that point I was going to die. And my family couldn't get in. And by that time, I was on too much oxygen to just get up and walk out myself. And it started a 12 days of what I call terror, 12 days of terror, in which I didn't get water, food. There was medical abuse, neglect. At one point, I wanted my priest to be allowed in to give me my sacraments. And they told me the only way that would happen is if I took remdesivir, if I agreed to remdesivir. I took one round, he came in, and I told them I didn't want any more. And ultimately, so many things happened. My family was advocating for me and trying to get things ready. And eventually my husband, who had been a military officer and a former nurse in the private sector, he had had enough. And him and my daughter came to get me out on day 12. And he basically stormed the ICU, got in my room, and there was a 6-hour police standoff in which they did not want to let me go. And we had to get politicians involved and lawyers involved. And eventually he took me home and saved my life, and during that time they had made me, the things that they did made me worse. And the things that they told my family were lies, like you have to let her go. She'll need a lung transplant, which clearly isn't true because I'm having this conversation with you. And there were all these things that they wouldn't let my family in. They tried to get them to agree to venting, all these different things. And so when they got me home, and once I was out of the woods, I thought, we just had the most craziest experience here in Texas in a hospital. And I said, no, nobody's going to believe this. And so I started, reaching out and telling my story. And I actually met, I think Carolyn Blakeman reached out to me on Facebook, said, hey, you want to tell your story? And Brad and Carolyn interviewed me. And I knew from that interview that they knew what was up. And it was at that I realized that there were so many people out there. I heard from so many people, hey, this happened to us. This happened to my loved one. This happened to my husband, my wife, my mother, my father, and they didn't make it. And there were very few survivors like myself. Still to this day, we haven't found that many survivors. It's mostly people who have died. And so Carolyn and Brad had been working on this from the get-go. And I decided I was going to throw all of my time and talent that I had left over into working with them to stop this hospital holocaust that's going on. And that's how I met these two great people.
Incredible. And an issue that is extremely important and could not be more salient, I think, as we move ahead. And in case each of you was unaware, and I want the audience to know also, Tucker Carlson has just recently recorded an interview with a biological scientist discussing that the vaccines were indeed a haphazard weapon. And so we're moving into a period where this sort of discussion is going to be very, very important. It's going to be crucial to archive the record and get all of the details and facts as we move ahead, because we are moving the levers of justice in the world, and the spirit of mankind will not rest until this type of evil is dealt with and faced down. And actually, Mr. Geyer, that's where I'd like to come in. It's my understanding that you had a distinguished career, military initially, and then in the private space also. Been around the block. You're currently actually in, I believe, Asia at the present moment, and there's a very large time difference, and you've taken time out to come and be on this call, which is itself is very appreciated. But what in the world drove you to do the work that you're doing now? What occurred where you looked at the world and said, I cannot stand by and watch this happen?
Well, I'm actually in Hanoi, Vietnam right now. One of the things I'm doing over here is meeting with victims of the Pfizer vaccine. And it looks like we have a dozen victims who lost loved ones, primarily seniors. After, this was July 2021, when in the United States there were about 600,000 dead over our population. In Vietnam, there were perhaps fewer than 1,000 dead over 95 million population, but they rolled out the Pfizer vaccine and the entire country was put under lockdown. And by the end of the year, we're not really sure exactly how many people died, but we think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of between 30 and 50,000 died. It literally was a die-off. And we have a dozen plaintiffs from Saigon, essentially, which is now called Ho Chi Minh City. And then here in Hanoi, we have somebody who actually had to have a kidney transplant after getting the Pfizer vaccine. And I'm hoping to meet with the family of a young woman who passed away. So that's why I'm here. And ironically, I was here between February 1st, 2020 through May 15th, 2020. And when you ask me, what is it that I saw? I was outside the United States. So my IP address was outside of what I call CONUS, which is continental United States. And I think that whatever it is that we have pointed at us in terms of information filtration, some people refer to it as an information war. I'm not really sure, but for whatever reason, being outside of the United States at that time, it was very easy for me to see what I think others couldn't see who were inside the United States. I thought that the United States was acting, it was behaving in a way that I didn't recognize. It didn't seem intuitive to me that we should have been making the choices that we were making. And I was also working with some Vietnamese doctors who told me very early on that venting patients would kill them. It was a very bad idea. At the same time, when we were retooling production lines, I think it was car manufacturing plants to produce ventilators. And I was also told that they were taking 1-hydroxychloroquine a week that gave them protection against the COVID-19 virus. So nothing was adding up. And I came back in May, and we formed these sort of, I guess you could call it citizen information news groups on Facebook and Twitter, primarily on Facebook, and to get the word out about the importance of early treatment, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. And it was very strange. I remember it was around June, the first week of June, and Sally Loveland, who's a friend of mine who was with us on one of these news groups, posted an NIH article on hydroxychloroquine, and she was banned. She had like a 2-week ban. And I thought, this is really bizarre, where we're being censored for posting an NIH article. And then one thing led to another. We just were in this massive battle on Facebook to try to get the word out about the importance of early treatment, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin. And ironically, they prevented us with, now we know the government, this was under government direction, Facebook and Twitter, their management teams both engaged and carried out a censorship regime on us, the medical freedom movement. So we were unable to get our word out to many people. And now, ironically, a lot of those people are our members. We weren't able to get them the information, and as a result, they weren't able to act on it, and way too many people died. And they comprise our membership now. So that was a little bit of a longer explanation that maybe you wanted, but that kind of gives you the full context.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And it paints the picture that is beginning to become eerily similar if we look at the narrative space around the rest of the planet. The audience for this program, for example, is very well aware that there is an active information struggle to control the narrative and thus control the beliefs, the understandings, and the conclusions of the mass population, right? The general public at large. And now I think we're moving into a period of time where those who have attempted to cover up their crimes are realizing that the cover-up's just not going to be enough because of exactly what you just discussed. And that's actually what I want to move into, but I want to get over to Ms. Blakeman as well. Ms. Blakeman, you sort of have a similar vein, right? A similar understanding of things and a similar involvement, albeit different in certain details. Do you mind to share with us how you came to this particular table?
Sure. I was a blogger and an artist before all this started. And in 1995, I lost a daughter. And so when they announced the COVID pandemic, I freaked out that I was going to lose somebody else I loved, and I couldn't go through that again. So I started heavily, obsessively researching early treatments around the world, what people were using, what was working, what wasn't. And I stumbled on very early in 2020 that there was working early treatments. So I started blogging about those, and I was being censored. My entire YouTube channel was taken down. I was banned from Google. I'm like, this is so weird. Why I'm not even writing about my opinion. This is just facts, like what is Uttar Pradesh in India using, and their statistics. And one of my blogs somehow made it up to Brad in New Jersey from Texas, and he at the time was suing Facebook for censorship of early treatment. And so he knew I did a lot of research. We got on a Zoom call with a bunch of people from around the world, talking about this censorship. And so Brad and I started trying to get the word out on Facebook and Twitter, and we just kept getting, censored and censored. So we started interviewing people. So we're going to document these stories, preserve the historical record, get these accounts on the record, and so they can't be memory hold and forgotten about, because this data and these people need to be preserved. That's how we met Gail, but we started the COVID-19 Humanity Betrayal Memory Project, which documents, we've got over, I think, 1,200 stories in there now, a video testimony with a written account and all the facts about the case, and how these people died. And what we found after several hundred was they were all the same. They were all the same. So we developed a document called the 25 Commonalities. And it's the 25 things that we see in almost every single case. And it's like watching a horror movie every time an interview is done. But they're exactly the same. So we've kind of grown from there. There was 4 of us when we started. I don't know how many do we have now. In our extended groups, there's tens of thousands that we interact with. But just our citizen task force, I think we're up to like 165. We interview teams and legislation teams and all kinds of media teams. So we're really active in trying to get the word out to the American people that there are working early treatments. They're still getting remdesivir. They're still getting these protocols. We've helped a lot of people get out of hospitals.
We helped 17 last month, 17 just this last December,
so
that reached out to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now we're just all pretty much full-time volunteers, and getting some lawsuits out there, getting a class action filed. So we're very, very busy, very active, and trying to reverse what's happened in the spiritual war that we're in.
Well, and that's a very interesting point to end on, the spiritual nature of this, because I think when we have to step back and consider the breathtaking evil that must be at play in the world, to have the types of studies that we've now had done, the longitudinal data emerging worldwide regarding both the protocols and the remedies that were recommended for the protocols, et cetera, and nearly all of it is conclusively bad in a statistically significant, scientifically confirmed, peer-reviewed way. And our institutions continue to push this particular agenda, to push the recommendations for these injections for children that have absolutely no basis, to push the recommendations at the hospital level, as you've just described, and to continue to threaten the board certifications and really what amounts to the livelihood, right, the earning capability of the medical professionals out there who are halfway decent, right? It shoves them into silence and submission, and they become complicit in the greatest crime ever contrived. And so, Gail, I'd like to actually pass this over to you and Brad and maybe go back and forth with this. This is clearly a spiritual war. This is clearly an information battle. But how do we take on, and between your all's expertise and the work that you've been doing, how do we take on really this mammoth Goliath that exists between the bureaucratic machinations of the U.S. government and these private corporations that have extreme wealth, extreme power, and extreme influence in the medical, the healthcare space, and really even the legal space around the world?
Well, we have to I'll jump in. Raise public awareness. We have to get the word to the people. They may have the money and the power, but we have the people. And when we educate those people and get the real statistics out and the real truth out, then we're going to, build enough of an uprising, an army to get those elected officials out of office that are, passing these policies, try to challenge the PrEP Act on a constitutionality basis, file lawsuits, just keep on filing lawsuits, and just show that this is not just an isolated incident. This happened to millions of Americans, and more than millions, around the world. So public education is huge. We do a lot of that. We do a lot of media. We do Substack, Twitter Spaces, rallies, as much as we can educate. And then, of course, the lawsuits are very important too. People kind of listen to those more.
And we need whistleblowers and victims to come forward. The more people that come forward and stand up, the more people wake up. We see it all the time. And Brad, I mean, has been an incredible, like, he comes up with some of the most incredible ideas to fight this. He knows his stuff. He is a great, I think he's a great leader. So
we have the benefit of him, being a former federal prosecutor for 21 years. He saw it from the other side, and he knows how to build task force, and he knows how to, take down people from the other side. So he can switch that around and use it to help us.
Incredible. Mr. Geyer, actually, I'd like to ask about that from a overarching legal standpoint. It's certainly no question that we've seen worldwide wanton violation of Geneva, and that we've seen worldwide wanton violation of the Nuremberg Code. But as it pertains to the actual gears and levers moving in the space, it's my understanding that class action lawsuits are about the most effective way to draw attention to mass wrongs, to mass wrongdoings, and that may even be a vehicle by which we could arrive at the adjudication of the violations of those aforementioned documents that we all really need to administer the appropriate international justice. What is your opinion on how this process is going to work out?
I think we're beginning to see it. When we first came into the space, I think there was unanimous opinion that filing a lawsuit against physicians, nurses, hospital staff for their treatment in hospitals was impossible because the PrEP Act conferred immunities on everyone. And I think we've proven that wrong, because I think about 90 cases have actually been referred out. So, and I believe that every case has been filed by an attorney so far. Out of those, none have been dismissed yet. So we don't know that it's yet possible to get through the labyrinth of overlapping immunities, but early indications are positive. I would say, and we're continuing to refer cases out. We also filed a case against Gilead in the state of California. We just they sought to remove us to federal court, where Gilead believed it had a much better defensible case there because of that PrEP Act. And we just filed a motion to remove it back to remand it back to state court. We'll see how that goes. I mentioned before the reason that we're looking for overseas, or I should say that we're contacted by overseas plaintiffs that were adversely impacted by the vaccine. The reason that's fortuitous, I hope, is we think that there's a way through in the Second Circuit for foreign plaintiffs that would not be available to Americans, because since the 1980s, they set up, these vaccine courts and really eroded a lot of our constitutional rights that would protect us against unwanted vaccines. So we're going to try to put that case together as well. That's the first sort of platform building issue that we need to get accomplished. We're simultaneously sending out letters, prosecution recommendations to various states. There's one been sent to Florida, one sent to Mississippi. We just prepared one for the great state of Texas. And we're imploring these attorneys general to step forward, because the federal government has completely abandoned us. Not really sure why, but they are essentially delinquent, and they've just thrown us to the wolves. Most of the states have as well, by the way, and that's why with this We the People 50 effort, we went to some local boards, and we make appeals to local boards with our experts and try to educate them how they have the authority and in fact the duty to withdraw access to these vaccines of the children in those local counties. We've had some initial successes in Idaho and other states. All of that, again, these are platform foundational building pillars underneath what is essentially effective enforcement, which would involve the Department of Justice, the FBI, Homeland Security, HHS, OIG, and other inspectors general getting back into protecting American citizens again, get out of the business of chasing, parading grandmas, and get back into the business of actually pursuing the interests of protecting the interests of the United States and of Americans. In 2009, I'm going to rewind real quick, but in 2009, our enforcement programs were basically ended into procurement fraud, grant fraud, research fraud, big swaths of what would be characterized as big pharma fraud, and big swaths of what would be characterized as healthcare fraud. Some of those areas of enforcement by the federal government were completely ended. I mean, like eradicated. So we're a decade into this, where as a result of that, there's been no deterrence against fraud and corruption. And in fact, there's been so little enforcement that it created these perverse incentives and markets for, I mean, how do you get to an FDA treatment protocol that mandates the use of over 50 drugs, where you basically get put on a slippery slope? You're given remdesivir, which has a really good shot of killing you, causing kidney failure, and offloading your lungs from working, to where you're intubated, put on a vent, and the end of that, is usually a negative outcome. How did the best medical system in the world create this perverse, slippery slope where hospitals were billing $500,000 to $1 million to basically kill people? The way is that over a decade, there's been no enforcement, and we created a system of perverse incentives. And here we are. So we need to get the federal government back into this space. We need them to start creating deterrence again. We need them to start doing their duty, and start protecting Americans again.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said that any better. And actually, I'd like to pivot from that to a question about doing our duty, because it really is an important question to understand as we move forward, right? We've seen research come out now through Dr. David Martin's Institute on Biological Terrorism, showing that there have been at least awarenesses and suspicions about a worldwide pandemic event and a worldwide pandemic money-making opportunity, as described by Peter Daszak in 2016, going back at least a number of years. But to what degree, and how, as we look at across society, how do we apply this measuring stick? To what degree does premeditation come into this, right? To what degree do we have malintent right from the beginning to commit what amounts to organized large-scale mass murder? And really, this question is, I'd like to go to Gail first, but this question is for everyone out there, because it's a very salient and important issue as we drive forward. What is the appropriate punishment? And there is a punishment, I think, that will come. It may come slowly in court systems around the world, but these gears will eventually grind to powder, and we will arrive at a point where accountability is inevitable. So, Ms. Gail, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, well, so this is a great question. And I know Brad will have a lot more to say than us, but as a victim, from the victim side of things, I mean, I hate to use the word justice, because the wheels of justice turn slow, and that's a double-edged sword, right? It's a good thing because we have rights, and everybody has rights, and they need to, you don't want people you don't want it to be like the French Revolution, right? So you don't want it just to be willy-nilly. I see, from my own experience in the hospital, I think there are categories of perpetrators in this whole thing. There are those that organized it and orchestrated it and absolutely knew what they were doing. There are doctors and nurses who I think enjoyed or took great pleasure in harming the unvaccinated. That was very clear in my case. I think there are nurses and doctors in the beginning who just didn't understand what was going on and were very conflicted, and some of those have come forward as whistleblowers or they left the hospitals. A trend we often see is good nurses and doctors getting moved out of the COVID units, and travelers or FEMA nurses and doctors being brought in. So I think there's all these categories of people, and I think the people who understood what they were doing and did it anyways, or had a certain ideology, whether it was a disrespect for life or disrespect for disabled children or older people, or just felt people were extended. I think that those people should be held criminally liable. When you talk about premeditation, a lot goes into proving that. So we can't, premeditation is a very high bar to hit. And I'm not sure if it's obtainable, quite honestly. Because it's such a high bar. I'm happy with any kind of accountability, even in my own personal. I'm a big picture girl, right? I would rather forego the individual justice to get overall big picture accountability and save our country. Our country is in dire shape for multiple reasons. This is one little component of what is going on. Today's January 6th, right? So just look at the whole ball of wax. It's all connected, people. It's all connected. So there's a much bigger picture than the doctors and nurses in Gail Seiler's case being brought to justice.
Mr. Geyer and Ms. Blakeman, how would you weigh in on the same general question?
Well, I absolutely think it was a depopulation effort. I think it's planned and very carefully planned, and that's why we have criminal referral requests going out to AGs of states to investigate criminally Fauci and company for second-degree murder, very high domestic terrorism, all kinds of very high-level crimes. Justice means something different to everybody. And there's multiple ways we can get justice. Some people just want the acknowledgement of being believed because they've been told they're crazy and your husband just had COVID and they didn't really kill him. But we know that that's what happened. When you have an average bounty on your head of $288,000 a person, that's the average across the country. Some a lot higher, some to kill you. Hospital CEOs and corporations look at that as very persuasive. So you're much more worth more to them dead than you are alive, and plus they wanted to depopulate. So I agree with Gail that there are some nurses and doctors that just trusted the CDC or the guidelines that we were given, and after a while they saw what was going on and they stopped, or they didn't. And they actually, we've got cases where they would say, if it was my son or my husband, I would give them ivermectin, but my hands are tied. I have to follow what the protocol. So those people should be held accountable. There shouldn't be an amount of money or a job worth killing somebody. So yeah, I'd like to see the top people come down. Who knows how high this goes? If it was even, could go higher than our government, who knows? But I'd like to see all of them prosecuted that stayed in it when they knew or created it.
Mr.
This is Brad. I agree with what Carolyn and Gail said. I think we're going to see some criminal prosecutions eventually, but it's going to be on a timeline and in an order that isn't necessarily intuitive. I think if you can get some state action and they start developing some of this information, get it out in the form of court cases, we get some more independent journalism. Now we have thankfully we have some really good highly credentialed physicians and researchers who essentially are are independent journalists now. They you know, they have a blog stack, and they're conducting their own investigations. And as we aggregate all of that, and then hopefully whoever's in the White House in November, hopefully we can convince that White House that once again getting the Department of Justice into grant fraud, procurement fraud, research fraud enforcement, we're going to start seeing some case filings around, say, for instance, some of the decisions made and some of the research done around hydroxychloroquine and zinc in 2020, some of the approvals around and issuances of EUAs for the vaccines, for remdesivir. Maybe there will be a grand jury investigation into some of the early trials for the Pfizer vaccine, as an example. And they're going to find that this or that person conducted this or that type of fraud. And it's going to start to begin to present a composite picture of what happened. You probably get some congressional subcommittees that, although right now, you know, they want to, you know, I can't think of anything they want to do less. Maybe actually convene another January 6th committee to actually conduct an investigation. But it's right up there at the top of the list of things Congress doesn't want to do. But again, assuming that we get a good result and we get a good person in there in November, we'll start seeing, I hope, some congressional investigations with compulsory process. Then we can start basically doing what is the post-mortem on what happened in 2019, what happened in 2020, how did the Wuhan lab get started? Let's get a team and track all the intellectual property around COVID, around remdesivir, look at all the funding, how were the vaccines developed, what were the companies that manufactured them, how were they deployed, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so we'll start getting a broader picture and start seeing more traditional cases around grant fraud, research fraud. By maybe 2026, after maybe about 500 case filings that don't really fit under like the crimes against humanity mantle or anything like that. It's just like a strict grant fraud case or a research fraud case. Without the sort of the issue to burnish or push that narrative will just sort of create itself, because I think that picture will begin to form. People will put connect the dots, and you'll start getting public support for this idea that we really need to take a more systematic, comprehensive approach to the harms that were done on humanity in contravention of numerous international laws and the Constitution. In October of 2021, we filed the first, essentially we accused the District of Columbia of engaging crimes against humanity because they were punishing January 6th prisoners in the DC, what we called the Gulag. They punished prisoners who refused to be medical experimented on. So if you refused the Pfizer vaccine, which at that time was issued under an early use authorization, which makes it a test drug, they commendably they gave the Gulag prisoners the ability not to be forcibly administered this medical treatment that was being tested. But if they opted not to get it, they were then punished. So we laid that groundwork there in October 2021, just sort of to just sink a milestone in that we can, so that at least someone in the future may recognize it in terms of history. But it really was a cornerstone for what we're hoping that over time we're going to be able to get more of these cases, build this structure, and then get to some more systematic prosecutions, because I think you have to have them. We need deterrence in the system.
I think the key word Brad keeps saying is this whole situation is built on fraud. It's fraud and on every level. I mean, even our individual civil cases, they're not even really filing med mal, they're filing constructive fraud, because the fiduciary or the doctor has an obligation to tell you what they're putting in your body and give you a choice. There was absolutely zero informed consent. We were lied about the vaccine or fraud. We were lied about the early treatments. You know, a really great researcher, AJ DePriest, wrote a 75-page white paper called "Follow the Blood Money," and it talks about the money trail that went from the government and big pharma to the hospitals and doctors. And she's got a chart in there that shows the improvement rate for ivermectin was 63% out of 100 studies, and it cost $1. Remdesivir was fourth from the bottom. It had an 11% improvement rate out of 39 studies, and it cost $3,200. And you have to ask yourself, well, why are they paying people, hospitals, to use the worst drug, the most expensive and the worst drug with the least amount of studies behind it? I mean, that should open people's eyes right there. This is a fraudulent pandemic, and people need to be held accountable.
And not to mention the people that we find, the victims that come forward, and the whistleblowers and the survivors that come forward. And it was, very clear. I remember getting out of when I got rescued from the hospital, people asked me, "Oh, are you going to get the vaccine now that you almost died?" And I was like, hell no. Now I know that they're killing people in the hospital because they tried to convince my family to let me go. They tried to euthanize me. So I know that it's COVID isn't what's killing people in the hospital. It's all one big fraudulent, scare tactic. So, yeah.
And the fraud angle is how we're getting around the PrEP Act so far as well, because fraud is not covered by the PrEP Act. So they're arguing it's not what remdesivir did to the body. It's the fact that they did not disclose that they were even giving it, that it was an EUA, that it was experimental, that they were financially incentivized to use it, and that they had other choices.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well said by all. So let me ask in closing, if we have viewers out there who have been affected directly by these types of circumstances or are encountering others who are, how can they best get in contact with the former feds, and what can they do to help advance this needle forward?
Well, the first thing I would say is, if you have a story, tell it, boldly tell it. Go to chbmp.org and document your story. Schedule an interview with one of our wonderful interviewers who are all victims themselves, or I like to call them eyewitnesses to crimes against humanity. And one of us will do your interview, and we will get your story told, and we will promote your story. The other thing is, you can connect with us on Twitter at chbmp.org. We do a live spaces, or Twitter spaces, now called X Spaces, every Saturday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. We start, and it is growing and growing and growing. And the number of people that come forward and say, "I didn't even know that you guys exist. I didn't know there were other people like me out there." We hear that all the time. And so, join that, tell your story there, get some information. If you're a whistleblower, or you just need more information, FDA death protocol at formerfedsgroup.org, and you can, identify whichever one of us you need to reach, and we will get that message. And if you're an attorney that wants to know how to take these cases on, Carolyn is getting those attorneys together. We need attorneys with courage. We need attorneys with some courage to take on these hospitals and represent these victims. Go ahead, Carolyn.
I was going to say, and we have, 14 support groups a week now. So if you do come forward and tell your story, it's difficult to relive that, whether it's vax injured or hospital protocol. We do offer free support meetings every day of the week.
Incredible. Thank you very much, one and all, for joining me today. And folks out there who are watching and listening, I hope that you've appreciated the value and maybe have found some resonance in this message, because it is a message that has affected all of us around the world in nearly every single nation state without exception, perhaps for the first time in a very, very long time. And it happened in a way that all of us simultaneously connected. And understanding that connection and understanding our interconnectivity around the world, and certainly here at home, and how we the people are supposed to be in the positions of power to preserve these constitutional rights forevermore. This has been an incredible journey. Ms. Gail, Ms. Carolyn, Brad, I really appreciate you being here. We'll have the links in the description below this video. And everyone, this is SG Anon. I'll be back with you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.